1 Indus Valley Civilization and Unit 1 Indus Valley Civilization and Aryan Debate Structure 1.0 Introduction 1.1 Unit Objectives 1.2 Debate over Indus Valley Civilization 121 Antiquity and Chronology 1.22 Ethnicity 1 3 Theories of Aryan Origin 1 3 1 Orientalist 1 3 2 Utilitarian 1.33 Nationalist 1 3 4 Neo-Nationalist 1 3 5 Postmodernist 1.4 Arya-Dravida Dichotomy 1 4 1 Controversy regarding races Varna and Jati 1 5 Summary 1.6 Key Terms 1.7 Answers to check your progress 1.8 Questions and exercises 1.9 Further reading 1 0 Introduction. The 18th and 19th centuries in India were dominated by the writings of European scholars, usually known as the Orientalists or Indologists. Many of them were employees of the English East India Company and later, the British government of India. Indian scholars of the late 19th and first half of the 20th centuries made major contributions towards constructing an account of ancient India. Writing against the background of an emergent and later increasingly strong national movement, these historians came to be known as nationalist historians. The 1950s saw the emergence of Marxist historiography, which went on to play an extremely influential role in the construction of the history of ancient and early medieval India, until quite recently. The famous Indus Valley civilization has been an enigma. Many questions still remain about the antiquity, chronology and ethnicity of the people who created this great ancient civilization. Until recently, it was believed to be a 5,000-year-old civilization. However, historians and archaeologists estimate the Harappan civilization of Indus Valley to be much older than previously thought. On the basis of recent discoveries, there is reason to think the Indus Valley civilization may be at least 8,000 years old, making it 2,500 years older than previously dated. Due to scarcity of sources and evidences, the ethnicity of India is after the decline of Indus Valley civilization, we witnessed the emergence of a new set of people with distinctive cultural traits of their own, generally known as the Vedic Aryans. However, question of origins of Aryans is a debatable one. Different theories regarding the subject have been propounded by historians from time to time. In 1.1 Unit Objectives, after going through this unit, you will be able to understand the antiquity and chronology of Indus Valley civilization, analyze various theories of Aryan origins, explain Aryan-Dravidian dichotomy 1. 2 Debate over Indus Valley civilization. Until the early half of the 20th century, it was generally believed that the authentic history of India started with the attack of Alexander. Some scholars like Vincent Arthur Smith were inclined to put the AD 6th century as a watershed after which the more reliable history of India is available. Smith mentioned that there is a wide gap between the Stone Age and historical period in India and settled life which began during the 6.5 centuries BC. In 1924, when John Marshall announced the discovery of a forgotten civilization in the Illustrated London News, pushing back at a stroke the antiquity of the settled life in India by thousands of years, Smith's theory was automatically proven wrong. It also changed the mind of Western historians that there was no civilization in India before Buddha. However, the antiquity chronology of Harappan civilization still remains the topic for debate. There is also a controversy among the historians regarding the ethnicity of this civilization. 1.2 1 Antiquity and chronology. One of the most knotty problems regarding the Indus Valley civilization is the one relating to its antiquity chronology. Though this civilization has certain specific characteristics, it does not seem to be an isolated civilization. We find several outstanding common features between the Indus civilization and other contemporary civilizations that flourished elsewhere. Particularly in Mesopotamia, several findings made in the excavations at Mohenjo-Daro, like single cuneiform letters, etched carnelian beads and toilet sets, have indicated the contemporaneity of the Indus culture with certain faces of the Mesopotamian sites. Likewise, over Darran examples of Indian style and workmanship have been found at the Sumerian cities. At least 3 different Mesopotamian cities, Kish and Teli Asma, have yielded shields of square shape with Indian pictographs. These are found in strata which can be assigned to the period 2500 to 3000 BC. A cylindrical seal found at Tel Asma depicts the animals peculiar to the Indus region, such as elephant, rhinoceros and gharial, which were unknown in summer. Another Indus product found at Tel Asma is the knotware. Some heart-shaped inlay pieces made of bone of the exact shape of the decorative shell fragments of the Indus Valley have also been found at Tel Asma. The Tel Asma findings belong to the period 2800 to 2500 BC. A vessel of light green steatite with a matte pattern discovered at Mohenjo-Daro looks quite similar to an identical variety of stone with similar designs which have been found at the sites of Tel Asma, Kish and Sura. This may be taken to furnish a link between Mohenjo-Daro and Mesopotamia. Another cultural link between Mohenjo-Daro and Mesopotamia has been found at Tel Agrab. Here in a temple assignable to 2800 BC, fragments of a green steatite vase portraying a Sumerian figure seated before a building in which a large Brahmani bull of the Indian type is standing before a manger. The shape of some beads, bull sports and double cross designs are common to the Minoan, Cretan, and Indus civilizations. It has established that the earlier stages of the Minoan civilization are contemporary with the earlier dynasty periods of Egypt and Babylon. Certain parallels between early Indian and Egyptian cultures have been discovered. Among them are the copper terminals of necklace or girdles and terracotta candlesticks and imitation shells which were used as spoons. Another point to be noted is that iron was known everywhere in the Middle East in the latter half of the 2nd millennium BC. However, iron has not been found at the sites in the Indus Valley. This gives us the lower limit of the age of the civilization. The civilization that is found in the Indus Valley was of the Chalcolithic age, displaying great similarity with the second pre-Diluvian culture of Elam and Mesopotamia and the prehistoric period of Sumer, i.e., about 2750 BC. Excavation at Mohenjo-Daro had revealed 7 different layers of buildings, assigned to 3 periods: early, intermediate and late. Earlier layer lie submerged under subsoil water. Normally, a period of 1000 years is assigned for the occupation of 7 cities of Mohenjo-Daro. But as the decay at Mohenjo-Daro was much quicker on account of imminent danger of floods, and as the reoccupation of the cities was much more rapid as seen from the uniformity of antiquities in all layers, a period of only 500 years is assigned for the whole strata. As the civilization was already in a developed stage, a period of 1000 years is assigned for the antecedent evolution. The latest settlement of Mohenjo-Daro is, thus, assigned the date of 2750 BC, and the occupation of the 7 cities is assigned the period from 3250 to 2750 BC. This rough dating has been further brought down by a few hundred years based on the discovery of Indus Valley objects in datable strata in Sumer and Mesopotamia. Dr. Bree has placed the main phase of the Mohenjo-Daro civilization between 2800 to 2500 BC, and Dr. Gadd has given 2800 BC as the upper limit of the Harappa culture. Dr. Mackay has assigned the date 2300 to 2200 BC to the upper layers of Mohenjo-Daro. Taking all these into account, the culture period of the Indus Valley civilization may be assigned the date 2800 to 2200 BC. The cultures at different sites in the Indus Valley may be placed. The most important question that has been dodging the historians and archaeologists between these two extremes. 1.2. Two ethnicity alike is the ethnicity of Indus Valley civilization. The only definite material available is the human skeletons and skills found among the ruins. The skeletons and skulls show that the Indus Valley people were heterogeneous, comprising of four racial types: Proto-Australoid, Mediterranean, Alpinoid and Mongoloid. As examinations of the skeleton remains indicate that the Harappans were people of the long-headed, narrow-nosed, slender Mediterranean type, which forms importance is the Proto-Australoid with flat nose and thick lips. The bronze dancing girl seems certainly Proto-Australoid. Only one skull among the remains reveals the features of the Mongoloid type. One skull of the short-headed Alpine type has also been found. The bearded steed-eyed head shows elements of both these types, but the Mediterranean followed by the Proto-Australoid are the two chief ethnic factors in the Harappa culture. The craniological evidence thus testifies not only to the presence of diverse racial elements but also to free racial mixture among the Indus people. So far as the authors of the civilization are concerned, neither the anthropological nor statuary evidence is of any help to us. As a consequence, there has been quite an amount of speculation among the scholars. The authorship is thus ascribed to Dravidians, Rahus, Sumerians, Aryans, Panis, Ajuris, Bratius Vahicus, Dasus, Nagas and others. There are three theories regarding the ethnicity of Indus Valley civilization. We will be briefly discussing them here. 1. Elamo-Dravidians or Dravidians theory. The theory of Elamo-Dravidians or Dravidians is the most widespread theory regarding the ethnicity of Indus Valley civilization. It continues to be in the good books of certain South Indian scholars and Elamo-Dravidian sympathizers. This theory is based on the assumption that Vedic culture succeeded the Indus Valley civilization and drove out the culture of Dravidians to the south of India. As a theory, it relies on terrible inferences and usually secondary or tertiary sources. This theory is based on certain facts. The modern South Indian, generally Dravidian, is usually a mixture of Mediterranean and Proto-Australoid, the two main ethnic factors in the Harappan culture. The religion followed by the Indus Valley people was very much similar with those elements of Hinduism which were very popular among the Dravidians, such as the phallus worship, Pashupati seal attributed to Lord Shiva, worship of Mother Goddess and others are. There are certain difficulties in the acceptance of this view. Excavation in the south has hitherto revealed no traces of the Indus Valley civilization. Among the Dravidians, burial was generally adopted for the disposal of the dead. The Brahus were of Turco-Iranian origin, even though they spoke a Dravidian language. There is no evidence to support the view that they were the authors of the Indus Valley civilization. As we know nothing about the racial features of the Sumerians, we cannot say that the authors of this civilization were the Sumerians. Further, there is nothing to credit them with any of the known. Sir John Marshall, who had made a comparative study of the Indus Valley civilization with that of the Vedic Aryans, had found that both are quite distinct. Further, he thinks that the Aryans entered India about 1,000 years after the last vestige of the Indus Valley civilization had disappeared. This is based on the view that Rig Veda was composed around 1500 BC. However, there are some scholars who think otherwise. They point out that the presumed date of the Rig Veda, i.e., 1500 BC, is no bar to the Aryan authorship of the Indus culture. Firstly, because the date of the Rig Veda cannot be fixed with an approximate degree of certainty, and secondly, because the Rig Veda can safely be taken to have represented a period long after the advent of the Aryans into India. Evidence of skeletal material is also mentioned in support of the view that the Aryans formed part of the diverse population of the days of the Indus culture. It is also believed that the Rig Veda represents an earlier phase of the culture found in the Indus Valley. A few scholars regard it as a synthesis of Aryan and non-Aryan cultures. Two scholars, Kennedy and Lukács, studied the ethnicity of Indus Valley civilization by using a novel method. They studied more than 300 skeletons with the purpose of finding out the evidence of stress in the hard tissues of teeth and bone. Kennedy arrived at the conclusion that the Indus Valley population was not derived from peninsular India, nor reveals the changes population in the Indus plain. During the last 5,000 years in Asia, there has been a reduction of tooth size. Smallest teeth are observed in the north and northwest of the subcontinent, larger in West and Central Deccan, and largest in Southeast Asia and Sri Lanka. This is due to higher technology, comprising food production and preparation. Hence, it can be concluded that the Harappans were a relatively stable population in northwest India for several centuries. However, races communities suffer most from dental abscesses. Concluded that the Harappans had soft and easily masticated forehead and henkio, and the basis of comparative study of the Inam-Gaon skeletons. Lux caries, decay, and antemortem tooth loss takes place with equal frequency. Al suffered more from alveolar resorption, which is a periodontal disease, while Del these diseases are characteristics of a sedentary agricultural population while hunting. Thus, the dental and skeletal study made it evident that the Indus Valley population was not derived from peninsular India. It also rejects the theory that the Harappans were Dravidians, as has been inferred by some researchers on the basis of a skull of a Dravidian type, found in Central Asia in strata of 3rd millennium BC, or the presence of a Brahu-speaking people, which is wrongly supposed to be Dravidian language in the northwest. As a matter of fact, language has nothing to do with the environment the people live in too. Early Mundus or Peramunda theory. A main alternative to the Dravidian theory is the Peramunda theory. It is based on the assumptions of certain linguistic scholars like M. Witzel that early Vode language had certain uncertain words from probably Proto-Munda origin, and therefore, Munda-speaking people were the people of Indus Valley civilization. According to this theory, an Australoid prominent tribe probably lived in the Indus Valley civilization. The problem is that no Mundus inherited this culture, nor is this proved by archaeological studies. The theory remains a result of improper linguistic fantasy. Archaeological studies conducted in the Indus Valley indicated that all kinds of races inhabited there, but the culture they followed was 1-3. The Aryan theory, as both the above-mentioned theories lack proper evidence, the Aryan theory has re-emerged as the popular discourse. The earlier disproval for Aryans in Indus Valley is now being dismissed. Though this theory has been misused, the fact behind the theory is difficult to deny. Many able scholars such as Shrikant Talagiri have attempted to emphasize that the knowledge of writing and complex architecture of the Indus Valley culture more likely means that Rig Veda preceded Indus Valley culture. If that is the case, the chronology reverses, putting the Kuru kingdom around 3000 BC, authenticating the Puranas too, even if the Puranas are dismissed. The technology essential in both the epics is identical to the Indus Valley Civilization period than to the late Iron Age. Possibly, Mahabharata and Ramayana could have been written only later, perhaps after the arrival of Greeks, but they could have been inspired by an earlier date as well. The archaeological continuity between the Indus Valley and the preceding cultures also underlines the concept. Many genetic studies have depicted that a large gene pool has affected the Indians so as to advocate a significant migration into India. However, most of the Caucasoid DNA belongs to an older migration 12,000 years old, which bears no connection with the present Aryan migration Hurry. In short, it seems all races lived in Indus Valley. But their cultural and linguistic affinities are yet to be attested. Check your progress 1. Name the 4 main types of races found in the Indus Valley civilization. 2. What is the main assumption for the foundation of the theory of Elamo-Dravidians or Dravidians? 1.3 Theories of Aryan origin. After the decline of Indus Valley civilization, we witnessed the emergence of a new set of people, with distinctive cultural traits of their own, generally known as the Vedic Aryans. The original home of the Aryans is a matter of great controversy, and in spite of the lapse of time and the researches of scholars from time to time, there does not exist any consensus. However, it is desirable to refer to some of the important theories regarding the original home of the Aryans. 1.3. 1. Orientalist. The Orientalists were the most significant European interpreters of the Indian society and history. Although their influence on the policies of the colonial government was quite short and had almost completely faded during the first half of the 19th century, their role in the field of Indology was unparalleled. The term Orientalist was initially used to signify a school of painting in Europe that comprised artists who went to North Africa and West Asia in search for their themes. British Orientalist researchers in India started in the 1760s, with helping India Company administering its recently conquered territories. One of the most important features of Orientalism was to advance the interests of the colonial state. However, it was a complex phenomenon with various strands that led into many directions. But, in nearly all cases, its origins lay in the modern European worldview that was ambivalently caught up in the imperialist project. Friedrich Max Müller, 1823–1900, was one of the greatest Orientalist scholars. He brought out an authentic edition of the Rig Veda along with the famous commentary of Sayana, wrote the famous book, A History of Indian Literature, 1859, and established the series of Sacred Books of the East. He maintained that there was an original Aryan homeland in Central Asia, perhaps. He was the most effective advocate of the theory of a common ancestry of Indians and Europeans, as different from the Semitic legacy. He propounded the famous Central Asian theory. He declared that these Aryan nations have become the rulers of history, and it seems to be their mission to link all parts of the world together by the of the Aryans was unquestionable for him. Chains of civilization, commerce and religion. He assumed a small era and a high elevation in Central Asia, speaking a language which was not yet Sunset Greek. A kind of proto-language ancestral to later Indo-European languages, of which one came towards Europe and the other migrated to Iran, Ultima Hiran over the course of some centuries. It branched off in 2 directions, splitting again with one segment invading northwestern India. The common European speakers who attacked and defeated the dark-skinned Dasis of India. According to Max Müller, the Aryans were fair-complexioned Poles and religious practice, which no doubt underlined the racial interpretation of the conflicting groups, differentiated particularly by skin color, but also by lang. The Arai of Amur and the Das of Amur of the Rig Veda were understood used terms. The Aryans developed Vedic Sanskrit as their language. He believed the Dasis were the indigenous people of Scythian origin, whom he called to the Aryan, and the non-Aryans were segregated through the institution of the upper castes, and particularly the Brahmins of modern times were said descended from the Aryans, and the lower castes and untouchables and were descended from the Dasis. He popularized the use of the term Arai in Indian context, arguing that it was originally a national name and later came mean a person of good family, as was common in the 19th century. He wells number of words interchangeably, such as Hindu and Indian, or Assassination people blood words whose meanings would today be carefully differentiated. The theory of Aryan race became prevalent in the reconstruction of all Indian history, and the reasons for this are varied. The primacy given to the role of the Brahmins in the Orientalist construction of Indology was endorsed by the centrality of the Vedas. The Aryan theory also gave status and self-esteem to the colonized, arguing that they were racially and linguistically of the same stock as the colonizers. However, the separation of the Asian Aryans from the European Aryas was in fact a denial of this status. Such a refutation was essential in the view of those who proposed a radical organization of colonial society through new legislation and administration, and in consonance with the conversion of the colony into a viable source of revenue. The intricacies of caste were simplified in its being explained as racial segregation, differentiating the Aryan from the others. It made Indian origins pertinent to the current perceptions dominating European thought, and these perceptions were believed to be scientific explanations. Caste as racial segregation, separating the upper caste Aryans from the lower caste non-Aryans, was thought as a scientific way of organizing society in keeping with modern ideas. But this view was gradually discarded when there was evidence to the contrary. 1. 3. 2. Utilitarian. The utilitarian school of political philosophy was started by Jeremy Bentham, England. It was a byproduct of the Enlightenment of Europe. The utilitarian stood for that the power vested within the hands of the rulers must be utilized for the benefit of the society. The utilitarian was another school headed by the James Mill, who believed that the backwardness of the Indian society could only be improved through the introduction of enlightened despotism. James Mill and Thomas Macaulay were among the first proposers of this view, supported partially by evangelicals among the Christian missionaries led by Charles Grant. Utilitarian critique believed that Indian civilization lacked the qualities admired in Europe. Values of rational thought and individualism were absent in India, and India's culture was stagnant. The Indomania of the early British Orientalists was replaced by an Indophobia initiated by evangelicalism. They did not support the early Orientalist view of India and are said to have created Indophobia by describing Indians as barbaric, irrational and having no concern for political values. They described the Indian society as unprogressive and stagnant. James Mill saw in India a need mostly for reform and, thus, a corrupt and primitive version of Britain. The idea of an India that was less developed than Britain was a matter of pride and confidence for the British. Their ability to defeat and dominate the much larger India only convinced them of British cultural superiority. This superiority, in turn, justified colonialism in order to bring British civilization to backward India. In contrast to the Orientalists, Charles Grant emphasized the absolute difference, in all respects, between the British and the despicable natives of the Indian subcontinent. In the worst parts of Europe, there are no doubt greater numbers of men who are sincere, upright, and conscientious. In Bengal, a man of real veracity and integrity is a great phenomenon. He had no regard for enthusiastic portrayal of India. He criticized the scholars who had never even visited India, thereby undermining the relevance of their scholarship to the real world. He wrote, Europeans who, not having resided in Asia, are acquainted only with a few detached features of the Indian character. Grant was not the only Christian leader to criticize Hinduism. Alexander Duff briefly referred to the Aryan commonality by stating that the Hindus can point to little that indicates their high original. However, for the most part he simply ranted that they had no will, no liberty, no conscience of their own. They are passive instruments, molded into shape by external influences, mere machines, blindly stimulated at the bidding of another. To pursuits the most unworthy of immortal creatures. In them, reason is in fact laid prostrate. They launched into all the depravities of idol worship. They look like the sports and derision of the Prince of Darkness. 3 nationalists. Before the British conquest of India, it was generally believed that India was the original homeland of the Aryans. However, belief was challenged. It was argued that there were 7 languages belonging to Indo-Aryan group. Out of this 7 sister languages, only Persian and Sanskrit existed outside Europe. The remaining 5 languages like Greek, German, Latin, Gothic and Celtic are European, since the majority of the Indo-European languages are European. The original homeland of the Aryans was in Europe. This theory, however, was challenged by many Indian scholars and Indologists. Hindu nationalist authors have advocated the claim that the Aryans are natives of the subcontinent. They forwarded a theory that India was the original homeland of the Aryans. The scholars who advocated the Indian homeland theory were M. Gananath Jha, L. D. Kalla, D. S. Triveda, A. C. Das and Parjita. M. Gananath believed that the Aryans originally lived in Brahmashi Desa, situated in the confluence of the Ganges and Yamuna. L. D. Kalla opined that Kashmir and the Himalayan region was the original place of living of the Aryans. D. S. Triveda argues that Multan was the original homeland of the Aryans. A. C. Das has put the claim on Punjab. They have offered the following explanations in support of their theory. Why these scholars opine that there is no specific evidence to prove that the Vedic Aryans were foreigners. On the contrary, there are definite literary proofs in the Vedas that the Aryans regarded Sapta Sindhu as their original home generally. Migrating races lovingly cherished the memories of their original homeland in their legends and literatures, but the Vedic Aryans never talk about the name of any land outside India in their literature. More than any other European language, Sanskrit contains maximum number of original Indo-European vocables. It had more contact with the parent language of the Aryans than any other European language. This goes to show that India was the original home of the Aryans. 2. The Aryans left traces of their culture in the Vedic literature in India, while Aryans in other countries did not leave any such literature like the Vedas of India. This strange absence of Aryan literary records in other countries and its existence in India lends support to the theory that India was original homeland of the Aryans. 5. The geographical data mentioned in the Rig Veda matches with the geography of Punjab and the neighbouring regions. There are sufficient geographical evidences to show that Afghanistan and Punjab were original living land of the Aryans. Several hymns in the Rig Veda mention the names of the rivers of the region. The flora and fauna mentioned is also found in the Himalayan region. However, the above theory of India as the original home of the Aryans suffers from many defects. A number of scholars criticize the theory on the following grounds. It is not known why the Aryans migrated outside India before they could fully establish themselves over the whole country. Why the Aryans remained confined to northern India and large parts of South India lay outside the pale of Aryan culture for a long time. Moreover, the presence of non-Aryan culture languages in parts of North India and among the Brahu people of Afghanistan and in the whole of South India strongly indicates the non-Indian origin of the Aryans. If the Aryans lived in the country from time immemorial, then how could these non-Aryans and language come to India? The cerebral sound of Sanskrit indicates a mixture of Indo-European language of the Aryans with Dravidian and Austric dialect. If India was the original home of the Aryans, then how could such a mixture take place? The Indo-European languages in Europe are not affected by such cerebral letters and sounds. The only sign is that the Aryans who migrated to India adopted these cerebral notes from the Dravidians. It is almost established that the Indus culture was older and different than the Vedic culture. The non-Aryan nature of the Harappan civilization and its anteriority refutes the theory of the Indian origin of the Aryans. How could the Harappan culture with a non-Aryan nature flourish before it if the Aryans lived in India from time immemorial? Furthermore, many scholars hold the view that the Harappan civilization was destroyed by the Indra-worshipping Aryans. Apart from this, out of the 7 existing Indo-European languages, only Sanskrit and Persian are spoken outside Europe and the rest are spoken in Europe. The existence of large number of Indo-European languages in Europe and the archaic nature of Lithuanian language and its proximity to the parent Indo-European language definitely indicates the European homeland of the Aryans. The flora and fauna known to the early Aryans also indicates their original home in Europe. The early Aryans were not aware of the animals like tigers, camels, elephants, asses, which are generally found in the East, but they were familiar with animals like dog, pig, ox, cow, horse, etc., and trees like oak, willow, birch and beech, which are common in Europe. The Aryans were not familiar with the sea, which led Professor Giles along with many other scholars to suggest the European origin of the Aryans. It is believed that they migrated to India and other parts of Asia from Eurozope if Europe was the original homeland of the Aryans. It is difficult to determine the place where they originally lived in Europe, before they migrated to other places. The absence of any equivalent word for sea in the Indo-European languages has led scholars to suggest that the original homeland of the Aryans was situated in a region far from the sea. The examination of flora and fauna mentioned in the Vedic literature indicate that they lived in a temperate region. Professor Giles arrived at the conclusion that the early Aryans originally lived in the Balkan Peninsula and in the region of Bohemia and Austria-Hungary. The trees like beech, oak, and willow and the animals like cow and horse, with which the early Aryans were familiar, could be found in this region only at the time. However, Professor Hurt opines that the Aryans migrated from Lithuania to Caucasus. From the Caucasian lands they entered Iran. From Iran they migrated to Punjab. His theory of Caucasian origin of the Aryans is further supported by the discovery of Bozkır terracotta inscription found in Asia Minor and Tle. Amima letters of Egypt. Eduard Meyer, however, rejects Professor Hurt's theory. According to him, the Aryans did not come to India from West Asia or Iran. He believes that the Aryans originally lived in a place between India and Iran from where they spread castward and westward simultaneously. The place where the Aryans of Elivedto have originally lived is identified with the Pamir Plateau. The central position theory of Eduard Meyer also received the support of Brandenstein, but he maintained that the central place from where the Aryans migrated to India was not the Pamir Plateau but the Kirgit steppe of Russia lying to the south of the Ural mountain. The Aryans migrated to India and Iran from the Kyrgyz regions. Brandenstein's theory was based on his conclusion on a number of philological data. Mention of dry steppe region like Kyrgyz is found in the early Indo-European languages. On the other hand, a great philologist, Schrader, considered South Russia to be the cradle land of the early Aryans from where they migrated to different areas. However, Brandenstein theory is most acceptable among present-day scholars. 1.3. For neo-nationalism or new nationalism denotes the contemporary manifestation of nationalism as Hindu nationalism, opposed to the older idea of love for one's nation. The Hindu nationalists, led by Savarkar and Golwalkar, eager to construct a Hindu identity for the nation, held the view that the original Hindus were the Aryans and they were the original inhabitants of India. There was no Aryan invasion and no conflict among the people of India. The Aryans spoke Sanskrit and spread the Aryan civilization from India to the west. Madhav Sadashid Golwalkar rejected the theory of immigration of Aryans to the subcontinent, stressing that all Hindus have always been children of the soil. The idea of indigenous Aryans is supported with specific interpretations of archaeological, genetic, and linguistic data, and on literary interpretations of the Rig Veda. Since these ideas emerged during the rule of the internationalist and socially oriented Nehru Gandhi government, they lay dormant for several decades, and only rose to prominence in the 1980s. The rise and the popularity of the neo-nationalists in India have also to be located against the rise of religious revivalism. One of the most peculiar paths taken by any movement was perhaps that taken by the social reform movements of the early 19th century. These reform movements, for example, Arya Samaj of Swami Dayanand Saraswati, though started with the purpose of opposing colonial influences, also fostered religious orthodoxy and increasingly demarcated the community. Yes, the neo-nationalists had strong ties with India and they did not believe in everything Western as the best. They were more critical of the English. Their ideas and notions were more in connection with the problems of the masses. But since the neo-nationalists glorified the ancient past, they evaded the medieval period when the Muslims ruled India. So India came to be identified as being Hindu. It is because of this reason that the neo-nationalists found scarce support from the Muslims. The main contribution of the neo-nationalists was in mobilizing the masses, educating them to participate in the political struggle. Michael Witzel has severely criticized the indigenous Aryans theory of the neo-nationalists. According to him, the revisionist project certainly is not guided by the principles of critical theory but frequently takes recourse to pre-Enlightenment beliefs in the authority of traditional religious texts such as the Puranas. In the end, it belongs, as has been pointed out earlier, to a different discourse than that of historical and critical scholarship. In other words, it continues the writing of religious literature under a contemporary, outwardly scientific appearance. 1.3. 5. Postmodernism presents a fundamental critique of the conventional mode of history writing. Sometimes, the critique becomes so fundamental that it almost becomes anti-history. The main element of history writing, such as facts, sources, and documents, archival records, etc., all come under strict examination under the microscope of postmodernist vision. The certainty and continuity attached to historical writing are thoroughly exposed. The inner working of historiography is put under scanner and its proclaimed nearest to truth is attacked. The history writing itself is historicized, and its rootedness in the Western culture is highlighted by the postmodern thinkers. Postmodernism discards the objectivist tradition of history writing starting with Rank, which endeavored to recover the actual past. It has attacked history both in its grander versions as well as in its relatively modest versions. It challenges the proclaimed objectivity and neutrality of the historians and claims that the process of interpretation transforms the past in radically different ways. It is important to understand that postmodernists do not truly believe everything is subjective, and thus nothing is real. They believe in subjectivism as an approach to undermine established thinking, ignore scientific evidence, especially biology, which falsifies their central theory, and tear down the pillars of Western establishment, so that they may recreate society with their own vision. The vision is of a socially engineered utopia of anti-meritocracy, oppression of the minority, doublethink, and control over speech behavior. This has led critics to believe that postmodernism is actually just an evolved form of Marxism, since the old form was contradicted by reasons and results. They simply moved their ideology post-reason, post-reality, and even post-dialogue in order to end the discussion forever. However, it seems to have similarities to Nazism, the creation of a new Aryan race who have special status due to their genetics. Additional power is achieved by these identity groups by claiming they are not equal yet, into eternity. In contrast to Marxism, which, in theory, is about the masses rising up and owning the means of production, postmodernism is about creating a new aristocracy. In the end, postmodernism is about raw power. Check your progress. 3. Who propounded the famous Central Asian theory? 4. What was the main contribution of the neo-nationalists in India? 1. 4. Arya-Dravida dichotomy. The idea that there was an Aryan invasion was quickly connected with the idea that the upper castes were descendants of the Vedic Aryans, while the lower castes were the conquered Dravidians. The idea is that the conquerors used caste as a way to strengthen their position as ruler of India and to keep their people separate from the Dravidians through marriage restrictions on the basis of caste. This, in turn, supported the racial interpretation of the caste system and generally of Indian society. Some passages in the Veda were thought to imply racial differences between Aryans and Dravidians, or Dasis. Skin color and nose size were thought to have been indicators that the Aryans were a different race from the Dravidians. 1 controversy regarding races. Varna and Jati Caldwell, a zealous missionary, arrived in India in 1838. He imagined a racial dichotomy operative in Indian history and civilization. He conducted his operations in the Tirunelveli district of Tamil Nadu, where he sought converts in the Nada caste, also called Shana. However, he was not very successful. Frustrated, he appears to have attributed his failure to the influence the Brahmins had upon the minds of the Nadas, most probably. Caldwell thought that once he succeeded in undoing the power of Brahmanic belief, he will also wipe out the influence the Brahmins had over the Shanas, and all other non-Brahmin Tamils. They will be thus separated from the body of Hinduism and rush in droves to embrace the cross. Caldwell claimed that Sanskrit was foreign to South India and so were Brahmins and their religiosity. He asserted that Brahmins had brought Sanskrit with them when they migrated from the north to the south, along with a strain of Hinduism that accentuated idol worship. Sanskrit or idols were absent in the original Tamil religion. He attributed the Brahmins a distinct racial identity and imagined that India had a history of race wars. He claimed that Brahmins were of the Aryan racial stock. They had moved southwards as colonists and instructors once the Dravidians were militarily defeated by the Aryans. By the end of the 19th century, this race theory of Caldwell became an established fact that Indian civilization had emerged following a military clash between the Aryan invaders and dark-skinned Aborigines which left the latter defecated and subjugated. Max Muller also supported this theory. The reason why he did so had its own politics. When Muller began his researches, he had no racial theories in his mind. He believed that all speakers of Indo-European languages, irrespective of their complexion, make one human family. As Troutman puts it, Muller thought that the same blood ran in the veins of the soldiers of Lord Clive as in the veins of the dark Bengalese, Sikh. However, recently a new sphere of knowledge had emerged in Europe that of race science in which racial taxonomies were identified on the basis of the skin color of human groups. This new concept rejected the theory that dark Indians and white Europeans belonged to the same human group and also the idea that dark-skinned peoples were capable of building civilizations on their own. Muller now had to explain as to how the dark-skinned Indians had built a magnificent civilization. The assumption that he forwarded was that, at a point in the ancient past, India had been invaded by the Aryans. He very nearly mocked the Rig Veda to find evidence that it refers to non-Aryan enemies, but the result was still insufficient. It appears that Muller himself was aware of the fact how delicate the foundations of his hypothesis are when he wrote that the only expression that might be interpreted in this way, as referring to non-Aryan enemies, is that of Sasipura, as applied to Aryan gods, it means with a beautiful nose. As opposed to Vrasasipura in the Veda, which seems to mean goat or bull-nosed, and the Anasis enemies whom Indra killed with his weapon are probably meant for noseless. It is imperative to know that Muller himself later abandoned his interpretation of the word Sipura, so that evidence as to gnosis was reduced to a single word, Anasa, in a single passage of the Rig Veda, RV the 29th of May 2010. That we Indians still hold on to idea of there have been an Aryan invasion of our country is an indication of the supreme extent to which our minds are colonized. Removing this theory, garbed as fact, from our school textbooks can be a purposeful step towards decolonizing them. If not, this malevolent theory has to be presented to our school kids for what it is an outcome of the politics of British Orientalism. The Aryan-Dravidian dichotomy was put to political use both by the Brahmin elitists in the north and by Tamilian separatist voices in the south who were quick to capitalize on the idea of Aryan invasions. Check your progress 5. What was the race theory as propounded by Caldwell 6? In which area of India did Caldwell carry out his missionary activity 1? 5. Summary. The antiquity chronology of Indus Valley civilization is a topic of theme among the historians. Different historians and scholars have, however, taking all these into account the culture period of the Indus Valley. Different sites in the Indus Valley may be placed between these two extremes. Civilization may be assigned the date 2800 to 2200 BC. The culture. Another important question that has been dodging the history and archaeologists alike is the ethnicity of Indus Valley civilization. On the basis of examination of skeletons and skulls, it was found that Indus Valley people were heterogeneous, comprising of 4 racial type: Proto-Australoid, Mediterranean, Alpinoid and Mongoloid. Anthropological nor statuary evidence is of any help to us, as a consequence so far as the authors of the civilization are concerned. Neither there has been quite an amount of speculation among the scholars. The authorship is thus ascribed to Dravidians, Rahus, Sumerians. Area. There are 3 theories regarding the ethnicity of Indus Valley civilization: Elamo-Dravidians or Dravidians theory. Early Mundus or Paramundi. After the decline of Indus Valley civilization, we see the emergence of new set of people, with distinctive cultural traits of their own. Generals known as the Vedic Aryans. The original home of the Aryans is a matter of great controversy and incy of the lapse of time and the researches of scholars from time to time. There does not exist any consensus. Various theories regarding Aryan origins have been propagated by the scholars from time to time. They comprise Orientalist, utilitarian nationalist, neo-nationalist and postmodern. The idea that there was an Aryan invasion was quickly connected to theory that the upper castes were descendants of the Vedic Aryans, while the lower castes were the conquered Dravidians. The idea is that the conquerors used caste as a way to strengthen their position as ruler of India and to keep their people separate from the Dravidians through marriage restrictions on the basis of caste. This, in turn, supported the racial interpretation of the caste system and Indian society generally. Some passages in the Veda were thought to imp different chronology of the period under consideration: Penis, Ajuris, Vratius, Vahicus, Dasus, Nagus, etc. Theory and the Aryan theory. Racial differences between Aryans and Dravidians, or Dasus. Skin color and nose size were thought to have been indicators that the Aryans were a different race from the Dravidians. 1.6 Key terms. Indology. It is the study of Indian history, literature, philosophy and culture. Orientalist. It alludes to a person who studies the languages and cultures of East and Southeast Asia. Phallus. It is an image or representation of an erect penis, typically symbolizing fertility or potency. Semite. It relates to the Payopal who speaks Semitic languages, especially Hebrew and Arabic. Utilitarian. It implies designed to be useful or practical rather than attractive. 1.7 Answers to check your progress 1. The 4 main types of RACS found in the Indus Valley civilization were Proto-Australoid, Mediterranean, Alpinoid and Mongoloid. 2. The theory of Elamo-Dravidians or Dravidians is based on the assumption that Vedic culture succeeded the Indus Valley civilization and drove out their culture of Dravidians to the south of India. 3. Friedrich Max Muller, a prominent Orientalist scholar, propounded the famous Central Asian theory. 4. The rise and the popularity of the neo-nationalists in India have also, to be located against the rise of religious revivalism. The main contribution of the neo-nationalists was in mobilizing the masses, educating them to participate in the political struggle. 5. The race theory of Caldwell had become an established fact by the end of the 19th century. He believed that Indian civilization had emerged following a military clash between the Aryan invaders and dark-skinned Aborigines which left the latter defeated and subjugated. 6. Caldwell, a zealous missionary, arrived in India in 1838. He imagined a racial dichotomy operative in Indian history and civilization. He conducted his operations in the Tirunelveli district of Tamil Nadu where he sought converts in the Nada caste, also called Shana. However, he was not very successful. 1. 8 questions and exercises. Short answer questions. 1. Mention the common features identified between the Indus civilization. 2. Write a short note on the ethnicity of Indus Valley civilization. 3. Why is the Paramunda theory regarded as an alternative to the Dravidia? 1. Examine the Orientalist interpretation of the origin of the Aryans. 3. Critically examine the views of nationalist authors on the origin of Arya. 6. What is Arya-Dravida dichotomy? Discuss the controversy regarding as. 4. Briefly explain the neo-nationalist perspectives on the Aryan origin. 5. What were postmodernists' views on the origin of Aryans? Other contemporary civilizations theory. Long answer questions. 2. Discuss the utilitarian theory of Aryan origin of Aryans 1.9 further reading Taylor, Isaac 1890. The origin of the Aryans, an account of the prehistory, ethnology and civilization of Europe. New York, Scribner and Wolfoni, Jonathan Mark Kenoyer, 1998. Ancient Cities of the Indus Valley Civilization, Oxford University Press. Davlica, Matt Huka Keshav 2007. The Aryans. Myth and Archaeologue. New Delhi, Munshiram Manoharlal Publishers. Malik, Kenan 1996. The Meaning of Race, History and Culture in Western Society. London, Macmillan, Wheeler, Sir Mortimer. 1979. The Indus Civilization. 3rd edition. Cambridge University Press. Endnotes 1 Shashi Bhushan Upadhyay, 2016. Historiography in the Modern World, Western and Indian Perspective. Oxford. Page 417 to https www.scribd.com document/35,991,706 The Aryan Hypothesis A and Indus Identity 3 Edwin Bryant, 2001. The West for the Origins of Vedic Culture The Indo-Aryan Migration Debate. Oxford University Press, page 49.